Alright, look, I'm not gonna lie and tell you this is Tool's best album. I'm not even gonna lie to you and tell you this is their second best album. In fact, I won't even lie to you and tell you it's their third best album. In fact, actually, I'll stop right there. Fear Inoculum is Tool's latest album and serves as potentially the concluding piece of the grand Tool discography. Maybe in another 13 years we'll get another record, but I'll tell you a secret, dear viewer. I don't have a good feeling about it. Today I'd like to dive into this record's deeper layers, unpack the lyricism on what I would call perhaps the most cryptic Tool record to date, and conclude my journey in analyzing Tool's music. Then they'll leave me alone. Without further ado, let's dive into the first track and the title track, Fear Inoculum. The project starts with the title track and honestly, one of my favorite songs on this record. The track begins with the phrase, immunity, long overdue. Contagion, I exhale you. So first, let's define the big word that I don't know. Contagion, not to be confused with the Matt Damon movie, is the communication of disease from one person to another by close contact. In terms of this song's message, the spreading of a harmful idea or practice, the initial phrase informs us that the expulsion of a contagion is long overdue. The speaker here seems to have realized that they are under influence of who he calls the deceiver. The exhaling mention perhaps being the speaker ridding himself of the deceiver's influence. Now, who or what is this deceiver? I believe in this case, the deceiver is fear. The speaker admits in the next line that he trusted this deceiver, in essence, trusting his fears and his anxieties, and trapped himself within his own mind. The bridge begins as the deceiver speaks for the first time. He says, "You belong to me. You don't want to breathe the light of the others. Fear the light. Fear the breath. Fear the others for eternity." The deceiver beautifully paints this picture of a world of fear. The fear owns the speaker completely and has isolated him from the others. The deceiver attempts to trap the speaker within his own fears, these fears not being natural to the speaker, but fears implanted by the deceiver himself. The speaker recognizes this pattern and identifies the source of his fear and realizes that these words were able to completely inoculate him with fear and that these words were all based on deception. Perhaps the speaker is asking us as the listener if we can recognize this cycle within ourselves, if we're able to identify the toxicity being verbally implanted right into our brains. The speaker repeats the phrase, "bless this immunity." In essence, the very identifying of these patterns was enough to grant the speaker complete immunity from this deceiver. Simply acknowledging the lack of power these words truly hold was enough for the speaker to remove himself from the cycle of fear. The chorus begins as the speaker once again exhales and expels the fear within him, recasting his tale or rewriting his own story. Perhaps a harsher story, but one with more truth. A story of true self-reflection and acceptance. A story that shatters the veil of the deceiver and destroys the fear implanted onto the speaker. Weaving his allegorical elegy, an elegy being a poem written in grief, in terms of this song, the speaker parts with the words of the deceiver. The next verse begins as the speaker further removes himself from the deceiver. The speaker mentions mitosis here. In essence, the part of himself being masked by the fear will be allowed to surface. Cool little fun fact, the word mitosis here is set at the exact half point of the song, down to the second. In a way, it splits the song in half, just as the speaker's mind splits when the fear is released. It's at this point that the song's tone changes a bit, and begins to take on a bit of a more positive message. The bridge begins as the speaker relinquishes his control. He tears it all away, the deceiver's mask stripped away, the poison overflows, and the speaker rids himself of that crippling fear. The veil is torn, and the speaker watches in awe as the deceiver, terrified, runs away. A long time coming. Numa. Another really moving track, this one. The word pneuma is actually an ancient Greek word for breath, and in religious context, spirit and soul. The song begins with a message shared throughout many Tool tracks, Parabola being the first song that came to my mind. The speaker describes that we as human beings are all spirits experiencing life through this human flesh. The speaker states that our true purpose in this life is to ascend beyond this flesh and to become Numa again, the soul, to return from which we came. The chorus begins as the speaker speaks more on our true essence. He reiterates that we're here to enjoy this life and to then return to the one true consciousness from which we all came. He says that we're all the same, one spark, born of one breath, all part of one whole. The next verse begins as the speaker speaks directly to the listener. Wake up, he says. Release the light and wake up. Wake up to the true essence of this world. Wake up to your purpose, your divinity, your infinite power. The instrumentation then slows down a little bit as the word spirit is repeated a couple times. I don't know why, sorry. The next verse begins as the speaker once again reiterates that this fleshy body we inhabit is not our true self. Our mind is our true self. We are our ideas, our personalities, our spirits, our light. We may be bound to this flesh, but we are not this body itself. The song concludes with a short outro where the speaker implores us to reach out, to wake up, and to remember. We are one, capable of all. Litany contre la poix. I'm not looking up how to say that shit. I don't care. Fuck you. A little interlude track here. The title here is in French, translating to Litany Against Fear. Another word I don't know. Let's define that shit. Litany is, in Christian worship, a form of prayer used in services and processions and consists of a number of petitions. The title is in reference to Frank Herbert's Dune. The Litany Against Fear is a mantra said by the higher members of society in mental training throughout that series as a way to ground themselves when experiencing fear or anxiety. It goes like this. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Notice anything about that quote, dear viewer? It also perfectly describes the story told on the title track. This track is also what's known as a musical palindrome, meaning it plays the same forward as it does backwards. That's pretty cool. All right, I'm done with this one. Invincible. Invincible is one of the, I guess, wordier songs on this record. It's got a lot of words, more than the other songs. I didn't know how to transition. This song begins with an old, now retired warrior reminiscing on his life. He acknowledges that his glory days are behind him, but he still finds himself longing for just one more win, one last ride. It seems the warrior has lost his purpose in life, or more likely reached his goals and is now kind of lost on his path. As he looks back to his past self for answers, he acknowledges his struggle with the knowledge that, well, he's old. That he'll soon be forgotten in time as the relevance of his life slips away. But still he remains proud of who he is and the things he has accomplished. He remains the same man he once was, albeit a little bit weaker, as he admits the perhaps futile nature of his efforts. He acknowledges this timeless struggle and the lack of a solution to his problem. He recalls his past glories, his prowess, and perhaps even his cruelness. I didn't know that was a word, but there's no red line in this script. Caligula is mentioned here, who was a Roman emperor known for his cruelty and his decadence, perhaps likening himself to the emperor. He once again acknowledges the futility of his battle, but once again stands tall and proud in the face of this adversity. He loses himself in the moment, a flash of purpose as he looks back on his life, a shadow of who he once was. As the dread alarm crashes, one last call to action for our hero, to be or not to be, as he awakens to his true purpose, his final task, to awaken and to persevere one last time. Legion Inoculum, another interlude track. That's 2 out of 5 if you're keeping track. I'm just going to read this guy's interpretation. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Any great warrior must confront the Legion. However, one must protect themselves from the attitude, beliefs, and behaviors of potentially large crowds. Perhaps to inoculate yourself to the Legion would be to make yourself immune to being at their effect. Stoic philosophy tends to echo this sentiment. For example, Seneca, in his moral letters to Lucilius, to consort with the crowd is harmful. There is no person who does not make some vice attractive to us, or stamp it upon us, or taint us unconsciously therewith. Certainly the greater the mob with which we mingle, the greater the danger. I mean that I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more voluptuous, and even more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among human beings. Descending. The song begins with the speaker touching on, well, the end of mankind, the epilogue of our story, the last chapter in the saga of mankind. The speaker remarks that we're so blissfully unaware of this slow descent towards the end that we're quickly approaching the point of no return. He says falling isn't flying, floating isn't infinite, implying that it all comes down to our perception. We perceive this world as free, we view our decline as progress instead of the reality of the situation. The speaker discusses this rapidly approaching end as he pleads with us to try and mitigate the damage, to slow down our fall before it's too late. He reiterates that this descent is but a self-inflicted wound, a grave we dug for ourselves long ago. The speaker yells out in an attempt to wake the listener, to awaken us from the indifference to our surrounding into a state of prosperity, as it's the only path forward. He tells us the path, and it's a rather simple one. It's unity. Every Tool song and really almost everything in the world comes back to this one theme. All wars, all conflicts, everything could really be solved with unity. He screams out as the dread alarm rings through him. It's a matter of life and death. Rise, he yells out. Push the end away, rise above it all, and continue this grand story. The song concludes with one last call to action. He asks us to stay alive, to push through the pain, the heartache, the horrible times, to live, no matter what. Culling Voices. This is perhaps my favorite track lyrically on this record. The song begins with the speaker hearing voices. Voices merely of his own imagination, but voices that make him paranoid. He's anxious. He hears conversations that never happened, interactions that never occurred. He then faces down with his brand new label printed fresh from a therapist. Psychopathy. Don't you dare point that at me, he responds. Perhaps denial or merely a defense mechanism. He refutes the label. The narrator recalls heated arguments that others claim never even happened, and yet he finds himself guided by these events. We as people are often directed almost completely by our subconscious mind, whether we're conscious of that fact or not. Even unfounded thoughts can imprint themselves upon our subconscious and lead us astray, hammering home the point that everything we see is really just our perception of reality, and might be completely different than the guy next to you. The speaker admits to the error of his ways as he fully acknowledges his own reliance on his flawed perception of reality. He embraces this psychopathic label and acknowledges how misled he was. But the darkness of his own mind will not lose so easily. Even while acknowledging his perhaps incorrect view of the world, he refuses the label. The song concludes with the repetition of the phrase, "Don't you dare point that at me." As the song ends, the speaker embraces his internal fears and lets go of the outside world. Perhaps the message is to trust your gut, your intuition, and to embrace the world you perceive, or perhaps it's a cautionary tale. I don't know, I'm just a YouTuber. Chocolate Chip Trip, another interlude track, this one a drum solo from the octopus himself. There really isn't much here, to be honest. As for the name of the track, the producer of the record, Joe Barresi, had this to say. The studio we were at used to bake us these chocolate cookies all the time, and Danny called his drum solo on the album Chocolate Chip Trip based on the fact that all we did was eat chocolate chip cookies. Riveting. In slightly, and I mean slightly, more interesting news, this song really isn't seen as an interlude by the band, and more of a palate cleanser between tracks. Kerrang! Magazine put out an article about it, so this is probably baloney, but they said, Danny is so on top of his craft, in fact, that on Chocolate Chip Trip, he nailed his fast, complicated part in one take while everyone else was out to lunch. And while that title might sound tongue-in-cheek, it serves two serious functions. Firstly, it's an ode to his hero, Billy Cobham, the Panamanian-American jazz drummer who worked with Miles Davis and whose playing changed the course of young Danny's life. Secondly, along with Fear Inoculum's two other instrumentals, Legion Inoculum and Mockingbee, it provides a sonic palate cleanser between epic tracks Danny acknowledges are, quote, big bites to chew. I have nothing funny to say. Tempest, the big daddy of the album, dare I say. The song begins with the uncovering of a massive lie, seemingly told by the speaker, who in this case is kind of the antagonist. Keep calm, he repeats to himself, as he tries to keep himself composed in the face of a tidal wave of backlash. The instrumentation explodes as the speaker attempts to guide the storm. He guides it in pursuit of his own hysterically misunderstood selfless goal of helping mankind, suggesting that a destructive cycle would ensue without his control. The cattle must be guided. The perspective changes. Now the speaker is a part of the storm. He calls the liar out, claiming we know better. We know your nature. He calls out the liar's delegation of his crimes and shames the liar for it. He insults the liar for a while, to be honest with you, and then he mentions the Tempest, which will soon come and reign over the world. The Tempest is, however, inherently chaotic and may cause even more devastation, but it sounds better than being controlled. The speaker calls to the listener, control your delusion, he says. Victim of your own uncertainty, and therefore your doubt's not an option. In simpler terms, our insecurity and perhaps the easiness of being controlled is kind of killing us. It's sending us down that infinite void we talked about on Descending. The Tempest may now destroy the entire world, but there's no malice within the Tempest. The Tempest is completely impartial to all. Once again, the theme of unity appears before us, a message to begin concluding this record. A Tempest must be just that. The storm is here and we have no one to blame but ourselves. The devastation will ensue, and again, we can only blame ourselves. Our descent shows no sign of slowing down. The bottom is nearly visible, our demise within our own view, and the only way out is, as corny as it might sound, it's love. Love for all, and true unity is the solution to this problem. It's that, or devastation. Mocking beat, a little instrumental conclusion for this record. Man, they love doing that shit. Anyway, this song is made up of animal noises and jungle sound effects, with what sounds like these animals undergoing a little bit of pain. In this case, the destruction of this jungle is at the hands of humankind itself, or perhaps the Tempest. Through our lack of empathy towards anyone but ourselves, we destroyed this jungle. In connection with the previous track, we can assume this to be the cause of the Tempest's appearance, the catalyst of the storm, if you would. It suggests that nature will once again prevail over mankind, and that through our mockery of nature, we will be forced to face the Tempest all on ourselves. Perhaps extinction is the only way out of this mess. And on that incredibly dark note, we've reached the end of the album, and I've reached the end of the Tool discography. Thank you very much for watching. Like if you did not enjoy, and please dislike if you did enjoy. And I'm not done milking this tool cow, don't you worry. Opiate coming soon. Oh yeah, I made a second channel. I'm just gonna do whatever I want over there. So if you enjoy my sense of humor, or you think my voice is cool, please stop by. I'd really appreciate it.